There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Sean Blackburn with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Marc Goren. He is the CEO at Point to Point. Marc, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great this morning, Sean. Staring out the window, looking at about a 20-degree temperature and a bit of a snowstorm.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. I'm excited about our topic today. We're going to be unpacking, the changing role of data in brand stories. But before we begin, if you could just give our audience a little bit of background about you and what it is that you guys do over at Point to Point.
Sure. My background, I guess the best way to describe me is a serial entrepreneur. I have started and sold a number of different companies in both the tech space as well as the marketing and even graphic arts spaces. Point to Point is a B2B digital marketing agency. We focus primarily on industrial B2B marketers and have a nice range of clients throughout really North America that we help really understand how to build contemporary modern marketing for their organizations.
And so, today we're going to be talking about the changing role of data in brand stories. Overall, what's some of the changes that you are seeing and why are things different now than how they used to be?
Yeah, I think B2B is a really interesting market. And I think it's really kind of the example of marketing in the B2B space historically has been known as somewhat slow, a lot of collateral based way back when, very sales focused. And B2B is kind of like the red-haired stepchild of marketing. And so no offense to anyone who's red-haired or a stepchild at this point. But my point is B2B, it was kind of looked down upon. Around 2000, with the advent of really the internet becoming something, things began to change. Things began to change because of the availability of information. And one of the reasons why B2B was so odd as a concept of marketing is it was viewed as really technical, and the only people who could really sell it were really mature, established sales forces. But as consumer behavior or buyer behavior started to change, B2B started to change. And what we saw were three distinct behaviors, and these have been talked about and documented by a lot of different people. So back around 2000, a buyer would be at about 15% through the buying cycle when they raise their hand to talk to a company. Now data shows us that it's somewhere north of 70%. Some studies say it's 95%, some less than that. But the point of it is a buyer now is taking the time to really inform themselves of what it is they're buying, what their needs are, and really don't have the desire to interact like they did in the past. And that bleeds over from the idea of what a consumer is. And a lot of your other guests that have been on the show oftentimes talk about how there really is no difference between a B2B buyer as a consumer or as just a pure B2B buyer, that they're becoming the same. And that's a key issue for sure. That's something everybody's observing right now. But the three big behavioral changes that we see in B2B is that one is you're getting what are called buying posses. And buying posses are much larger groups that are making buying decisions. And that's, again, because of the availability of information. Those groups can find and share information they're looking for. And the other thing that happens is that because of these groups and how they work, we call what we would call stealth buying behaviors, which means you don't always see what people are looking for and thinking about and how they're interacting with companies and their brands. But these people are looking for things, trying to solve problems, but kind of working on their own, but not raising their hand. And so a lot of attention has been built over the last few years with technology to get people to raise their hands earlier and detect them earlier so that you can create engagement faster to get a competitive advantage in selling something. And then the third is, as I said before, is B2B buyers are acting like consumers. The Amazons and the online behaviors that they're showing bleed over into their daily lives. And by the way, this has always been the case. It's kind of laughable that people would say, way back when that, an engineer, or if you're going to sell an engineer, you need to show an engineer more graphs and you need to show more technical data because that's how they think and that's what they want. But that same engineer goes home, watches the same TV, consumes the same content on the internet, and at the same time is a consumer. And our brains don't fundamentally just switch on and switch off between work and home life. So big changes there. So, and the last thing that I'd say is that it's accelerating. So buying behaviors are just changing much faster than any marketer's ever really seen before. What we knew yesterday and the standards that we define fundamentally change. And so companies are always trying to understand, like, where should I invest? What should I be doing? And it's a daunting task because you're chasing something that keeps changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating, the sociological change that we are in. And so, as B2B marketers, in order for us to be effective, what's the sort of framework that you kind of use in order to really approach some of these challenges that we're facing?
Unlike a lot of conversations happening in this space, we try and really simplify the framework and really make it easy to understand. And the easiest way to make it understand it is to really divide it into two topics. One is the idea of data, which gives you great insight as to what someone is doing and how they're acting and what their expectations are, what their buyer journey is. And then the second would be brand stories. And we see the entire concept of marketing really dividing into these two groups. You have data experts and you have brand story experts. And so if you want to think about it, and this isn't my invention, this is old as time, you have to think left and right brain. So left is data and right is brand stories. And they both work together to make decisions. And I think what's interesting is as they make those decisions, the more complex the buying decision is, the more emotional the decision becomes because of the inability of the human brain to really manage a lot of complex data. I mean, that's why we have emotion. Emotion is what enables us to make decisions very quickly. So, it's like the idea of I need more data is really a misnomer. No one needs more data at this point. So what brands need to do is to be able to tell stories that create the emotions that help people pull over into a purchasing decision.
I think that's fascinating that I had never thought about emotions that way, that's the reason that we have those. So that's a fascinating perspective. As we're trying to focus as B2B marketers, is there kind of a certain area that you would say that, should be focused on, the data or the brand, or is it more of a both sort of situation?
It's yes. You have to focus on the data or the brand. If you're just focusing on the brand and telling great stories, and you don't have the data insights on people's behaviors, you're going to waste a lot of money and you're really not going to know the efficacy of what you're doing. If you're really just focused on data and you have all the information you need and you just can't pull through anyone because you're not creating the emotional connection, you wasted a lot of money on infrastructure and people without being able to sell things. And we've seen this, by the way. There's lots of evidence in this consumer. Procter & Gamble in the consumer world went hyper programmatic and started really looking at ways of looking at things just through an algorithmic approach. And it starts off being great, but it fizzles out pretty quick because you're not able to sustain the level of connectivity because it just becomes kind of dull. People sense that you're just not connecting to them. And we see that every day as consumers with the same programmatic ads. I mean, I made the mistake of looking for a pair of shoes. Please don't keep showing me those shoes. I don't want those shoes. But they're there every day, the same shoes.
That's so true. Yeah. You got to be careful what you search for these days, or else you'll see it for the rest of your life.
For sure. It feels like it chases you into your sleep. So we're seeing this constant kind of data brand pendulum. So what's happening right now is, and we see it with our clients, is that when you talk ROI to a corporation, you really think in terms of ROI as infrastructure. So if I buy the right tooling and I put in the right tech stack, then I'm going to get a great return. And so many companies build out great tech stacks, but never see a return. And there's a variety of reasons why they don't see that return. But part of it is they don't find balance between data and brand. They get really good at data, but they don't tell stories well. And it's proved over and over again. I mean, it's just this is what always happens in marketing. It goes to, we need ROI, and then everybody focuses on ROI, and you move the needle a little bit, and then you're doing the same things that you were doing to generate ROI, and then your ROI flattens out, and you say, "Geez, what's wrong?" And it's like, "Oh, we're not resonating."
Yeah, absolutely. And so we talk a lot in the B2B marketing space about content. And I know that content is a word that you're not very hot on.
No, I think content is a pretty nasty word. First of all, content is a great word for tech vendors in this space to use, because it's kind of like describing fuel. Like, I just bought this great new car. And then the answer is, yeah, all you need to do is put some gas in it and
put some content in. Yeah.
Yeah. Put some content in. And, the $4 million you're spending a year on a tech stack is driven by content. All you need is content. And it's like, oh, what's that? It's content. You get some blogs and you get some white papers, and you do some email campaigns. And if you really want to be on the edge, you can do some infographics. And then from there, you can do some surveys and polls. And by the way, we have all those tools for you. You didn't buy any of them, but they're there and they're available. We can train you on them. But at the same time, it kind of oversimplifies what people are getting into. So the word content is really a pure concept of commoditization of the creative process. And even when you say content strategy or we need more content, it's what is that? And it's almost like saying the word ad. Like, I need an ad. It's like, you need and no one would use that word now, because that's horrible to say, an ad. It's much better to say content. But what's interesting is, if you talk to any Hollywood, when Netflix is talking to their analysts, or Amazon Prime, they speak in terms of content as you would any KPI. Like, if you're selling paint, it's gallons. If you're Netflix, you're selling content and the level of interaction on content. But when you talk to the people who are creating the content, they're not talking. They don't go out to dinner and say, "Hey, man, I made some great content last week." They talk about the things that they actually created, like movies and shorts. They don't have content festivals. They have film festivals. So why am I droning on and on this? Because it's such an important part to success, and it's such it's so underemphasized in terms of the importance of how things actually work.
It's story time again, and we're talking about search engine marketing. Today, I'm going to tell you about a challenge within Pelican Case's B2B division. Pelican needed a partner with deep B2B expertise that could get them a massive bump in leads from their pay-per-click campaigns without increasing spend. After vetting a handful of agencies, they decided to go with Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency located in Southern California. Directive took on this challenge by refining their targeting and building custom landing pages for their advertising efforts. Once implemented, they saw a 208% increase in conversion rate. Needless to say, Pelican Cases met their initiative. And I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
And the other difference that you've pointed out is the difference between, selling tech and you mentioned industrial at the top as well. The difference between those two sides of B2B is definitely different when it comes to this conversation of content as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I probably go to a lot of the same conferences that you go to. And, when you're in the audience and you're listening to case studies, they're almost always about a tech company and
right.
how well they used account-based marketing, or how well they did demand generation or inbound, or anything that you're actually thinking about. And you're listening to this and you're going like, yeah, okay. And then you go for a break and you walk around the exhibition, and it's all tech companies fundamentally selling tech companies. Because for most of this gear to work, or these tools to work, you need pretty robust infrastructure. There's an interdependency on the tooling. And if, for example, if you decide you're going to buy a CRM system, but you don't have an appropriate inbound tool to that, or you don't have the right data connected to that, or you don't have the right customer insights to that, you just get basically a giant Rolodex called a CRM system. Or if you have a cultural issue with your sales folks, or a division between sales and marketing. So there's a lot of complexity here that is kind of underestimated. And please don't think from what I'm saying that I'm down on technologies. It's a really important part of our business. I firmly believe in it. But when you over-index in it in the selling process, and you commoditize what it takes to actually be brilliant at it, it's a bit of a disservice. Your sales numbers look good that quarter, but it doesn't necessarily help the people you're selling to. So getting back to your point, Sean, it's tech companies love the idea of data-centric thinking. It's what they do. And tech companies are the one right now that are leading the conversations of what really B2B modern marketing or contemporary marketing is. And so what's happening is when tech talks to tech, they can make music because they understand it. But when tech talks to big-time industrial companies, it's a very different conversation. And so going out and selling a system of different tools to a Dell is a lot different than selling one to a General Motors, and that's for a variety of reasons. And it really starts with just the structure of their companies. If you're selling software as a service, you don't have to worry about distribution. You don't really nearly as much about aging sales forces. And you just kind of go because it's you and the buyer. But in B2B, there's so many layers of buyers and influence that it's much more complex than that. And it's really a different game, really. And so what happens is the tech companies all talk about the wonderment and the advancement of the tools. And I think a lot of industrial companies are really frustrated at the difficulty of implementation because they're fundamentally in a different world.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that even goes to the type of content that is being created. If you don't know your audience, the content's not going to land. And I'm trying not to use the word content. You'll hear me stuttering, but I'm trying not to use the word content.
Feel free to use content.
Yeah. Okay. It's a habit. But I think that you're right as far as the difference in content for a tech company is going to be different when you're selling to industrial customers, or even just in potentially industries that aren't SaaS. So how would you approach that whenever you're looking at, if I'm a marketer and I'm deciding, what sort of content or what sort of materials I'm going to use for my buyers and to bring them through this buying process, how would you be looking at that and approaching that?
Well, one thing you're going to do, and I don't mean to sound like I'm contradicting myself, is you're going to have some sort of data to comprehend what your buyers are actually consuming or your prospects are consuming. But I can even at a more basic level, I can tell you what you probably don't need are more blogs, and what you probably don't need are more white papers. It's so since we talked about the word content, and content is this generic term that if you just keep thinking generically, you end up with blogs and you end up with white papers. And it's really interesting when you look at most of the inbound purveyors, they're very formulaic of this is how many blogs you need to write, and this is how many white papers you need to write. And if you just do that and you optimize your SEO, you're off to the races. It's that simple. It's not that simple. It was that simple 5 years ago when there wasn't 1 billion white papers and 10 billion blogs. So it's changed, and you have to rethink what it is. And I mean, the best way to think about content, again, is I don't mean to harp on this, but it would be like, think of the word content as the idea of food. But when you go to a 3-star Michelin restaurant, you don't talk about food. You talk about what happened. You talked about the experience. Right. Michelin restaurants are selling food, but they're not selling the same food that you kind of throw into your mouth in between sales calls. They're selling an experience. So it's a whole different world, and differentiation of content, thinking about content has really changed. So look, I mean, a key data point is every 60 seconds, 500 hours of video are uploaded onto YouTube, and 3.3 million posts are created on Facebook, and 3.8 million Google search are performed. Think about that. That's every minute. So there's this machine of information that's working, and just getting data insights is not going to fix the oversaturation of content at this point. So it's a real issue that people have to start really thinking about and actually building into their strategies.
I think that oversaturation, I think we've only seen the beginning of it. And, as marketers only focusing on the data side of things, how would you suggest people start to work in concept of thinking through these brand stories and how to tell them to their buyers?
I think they have to really understand and take the time to comprehend what sets them apart. If you look at their core goal of what online does, it's really about the commoditization of brands. And if I'm Amazon, what I want to do is completely commoditize everything I'm selling so that I can present you with an Amazon choice or an Amazon preferred. And that's where my margin is, and that's what I want to sell. So if I'm a marketer right now, I'm really thinking about how do I differentiate my brand? What is it that's unique and meaningful to what we do versus what everyone else does? And it's where the magic of marketing always has been. And it's hard to do, but when you do it, that's where your value pricing comes. That's where your growth comes. No one really wins long-term to create value by being an also. And what technology and really contemporary marketing is doing now is it commoditizes anything that doesn't differentiate because of the speed of information. So what you need to do if you're a marketer right now is spend the time to really comprehend why you're different and why that means something to your end buyer and how you can create resonance and differentiation with that.
I love that. And so if I'm a marketer and I'm wondering where to go, and as far as first steps, the contemplative part of it is there. How do you work with brands to do this, in the day-to-day basis with your work at Point to Point?
Great question. When we're working with any of our clients, we really look at their business in two ways. One is we take the technology component of the business and we say, let's really comprehend what infrastructure you have, what are your tech stacks, what are your data components, how do you track and comprehend the behaviors of your clients. So that's one area that we start with, and that's going to generate a lot of insights on the way to optimize the way we reach their key audiences. Then what we'll do is we make sure that the client has what we call a comprehensive brand equity charter. And the brand equity charter really goes through from kind of view like it's not quite a pyramid, but it starts at the most aspirational level of what the brand is and then goes all the way down to unique points of differentiation. And we make sure that every client we work with has real clarity of what makes them who they are, what makes them different, and what they're aspiring to. And then what we want to do is hold up the information excuse me, I'll use that bad word, the content we create. The better word would be their assets, which is another generic word, sorry. But the information that's going to actually create engagement to the end buyer. And I think that is a much better word. I mean, we constantly, our mantra at Point to Point is we turn indifference into engagement. That's all we think about. Because when you and when you think about the volume of data that's out there and the volume of information, it breeds indifference. And so everything is about, moving from indifference to engagement. So the lens we put on everything is, okay, great. Here's your data silo. Here's your technology. Here's the way you're working. Now, how are we going to take those insights by creating different concepts of engagement that's meaningful, that can generate the types of return that you need for your marketing budget?
I love that, man. That's a great tagline and something that wraps us up nicely here. The move from indifference to engagement. So, Marc, thanks so much for sharing your perspectives on the changing role of data and brand stories. If anybody's listening and would like to connect with you more and maybe would want to work with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, you can find me at LinkedIn, Marc Goren, and the other way is to just email me, and that would be MGOREN at Point to Point, and that's spelled POINTTOPOINT.com.
Perfect. Well, Marc, thanks again for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Sean, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a topic I love, as you can tell, to chat about, and keep doing what you guys are doing. You guys are doing a great job.
Thanks so much.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.